This is my late father's camera, and a few weeks ago I ran a film through it for the first time in decades. I actually made a film about using this camera, coming here to beautiful Durham and shooting one of the most iconic scenes in England. But how did those images come out? And more importantly, what was the second part to this story? Because there was a twist. Join me and I'll explain. So I hadn't shot film in probably the best part of 20 years. So it was a wonderful experience to actually come and shoot this camera. It took a little while to get my feel for it, but the muscle memory soon kicked in and loading the film was easy and winding on. I had to remember to do that. I took a shot and then automatically assumed that I could just take another one, which of course is not the case. If you remember in the first video, I talked about the fact that I wasn't sure whether the exposure meter was accurate, and I used this Sony Alpha 7 R5 to check the exposure. Well, the negatives came out pretty good. The brackets look all pretty even, underexposed, overexposed and correctly exposed. Everything looked pretty much spot on. Looking at the digital scans, the focus was probably about 80%. That's pretty good for a small camera with a fairly dim viewfinder and some quite old eyes, if I'm quite honest. I'll put some of the images on screen now, and as you can see, the one thing that I think is probably most striking about these images is how grainy they are. The film was Ilford HP5, and I actually sent it to Ilford Harman Labs, so I know it was processed by one of the best processors in the UK, but just look how grainy they are. HP5 is a 400 ISO film. If you take 400 ISO even from an iPhone, it doesn't look that grainy. The images I'm impressed with, but the grain really did shock me. And in a future video, what I plan to do is take this lens and shoot 100 or 200 ISO color film with this lens on this camera, and then I'm going to adapt this lens for that camera and compare them. We will shoot negative and then have it printed through a chemical process to get the highest possible image quality, and we'll also print this image digitally, probably at the same lab and possibly through the same chemical process. You can of course get digital images printed chemically. But as I mentioned, there's a second part and a twist to this story. This was not the first time this camera has been in Durham. In the late 80s, my father was engaged to a lady whose family came from the Durham area. They were due to get married, and the plan was to come up here and to buy a house up in Durham. Dad came up here several times. He absolutely fell in love with the place and he wanted to move up here with his fiancée to be near their family. Tragically, his fiancée died, and sadly, his dream of moving to Durham died as well. That's why I thought it was important to shoot the first roll of film on this camera in decades in this beautiful city of Durham. But there's another twist to this, a second twist to this film. If you saw the first film, you'll remember that at the end I showed some pictures of my dad using this camera. Now, amongst those images, amongst those photos, were a whole bunch of photos that I believed were taken in Durham. His fiancée were there, people that I believed to be her family were in these photos, and I believed it to be a hotel. Now, obviously, Durham being quite a touristy city, there's lots of hotels here. These images were taken in the 1980s, and the hotels here now just don't bear any resemblance. I spent perhaps the best part of a year searching different hotels, trying to match images from the hotel websites or perhaps Google reviews to the images of my dad, and I had absolutely no luck. That was until about 2 weeks ago. I was doing my sort of once a month look through the hotels in Durham. I saw the Royal County again. Now, this was the hotel that I really did think that Dad and his fiancée stayed at, but I couldn't find anything to correlate. It'd been taken over by Marriott some years ago, massively refurbished, and didn't look anything like the images that I had of my father and his fiancée's family. However, a few weeks ago, a lady, probably a guest, uploaded an image to Google, and I recognized something in that image. I dug out the pictures of my father, looked in the background, and there it was. I could match that brand new image with an image taken some 35, perhaps 40 years ago in the same location, despite the massive refurbishment. I had tracked my dad down to the Durham Royal County Hotel. It's just across the water there. And I think this tells us something about the power of photography. The likes of war photographers like Don McCullen could change the world with a single image. But an anonymous person posting a snapshot to Google can change the way I understood the history of my father's life. I understood where he had been in his life. There's a certain irony of my father not being able to make it up here, because when my wife and I had to leave Ukraine, we decided that we were going to move up here. Now, our reasons were entirely different. They were financial. It's much cheaper to live. It's much cheaper to buy property up here. However, I often wonder whether subconsciously, the back of my mind, I came up here because my father wanted to. I will never know that, obviously, but it's a nice thought to have, perhaps. So this little journey with the film camera has not only become a personal journey, but it's become one that really talks about the power of photography to change the world. We could be talking about incredible war photographers such as Don McCullen, who changed the course of history. Or we could be talking about a simple upload to a Google site from a guest in a hotel that changed my perception of my father's history. With the advent of AI, we really need to make sure that we grasp the power that real photography has. Photography has the power to change history on a global scale, but it also has the power to reveal history on a personal scale. So I really hope that you've enjoyed these two videos. They have been a very personal journey, probably a little unlike the other videos that I put out about photography. If you've got any comments about the power of photography, how photography's changed your life, or indeed if you've been able to trace your family tree through photography, let me know in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and a sub, and please share it with your friends. Every little bit helps towards getting this video seen, and I think it's quite an important video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.